everyone, my name is Riddhi and I'm the host of this podcast, Little Seeds of Knowledge. Thank you for taking out your time and tuning into our first episode. I am super excited that I'm finally getting to sit down and record this podcast and get it rolling on the road. This is just the first introductory episode, and it's going to be pretty simple because all I'm going to talk about in this episode is a little bit about myself, why I wanted to start a podcast, and my vision with this podcast itself. I am currently a senior in high school from the sunny state of California, and I've been an avid listener of podcasts for about a year now. Some of my favorite podcasts include the Real podcast by Natalie Barbu, Jay Shetty's podcast, The Indicator, and Industry Focus from Motley Fool, as well as NPR's Planet Money. For me, podcasts are honestly a really exciting and unique form of media that explain and tell a story about a certain topic. Podcasts are so diverse in the content that they provide its listeners because one of the podcasts I listen to, what it does, The Real by Natalie Barbu, for example, she hosts interviews with people from all different walks of life and different careers just to be able to help listeners see that there's so many different opportunities out in the world and there's so much you can pursue. While the NPR's Planet Money tells 20-minute short stories about the U.S. economy. For example, one of their stories was about a farmer and what the techniques he uses in order to fend off his chickens from eagles and how that plays a role in the U.S. economy. As you can see, these two podcasts are so diverse in the content that they bring, but at the end of the day, they're both united by the strong fact that podcasts are able to teach the listener something after every episode, and that a person really gains a lot of knowledge from listening to just one podcast episode. And I can attest to that because out of every single podcast episode I've listened to, I always learn something more and more about the world around me. And I think that's what makes podcasts so unique. They're also super accessible. And a podcast is just basically a YouTube video without the special effects, so it makes it feel more organic and real. And just podcasts, I think, again, like I'm saying, they're just super unique and organic and fun to listen to, which is why I decided to create my own. This podcast, Little Seeds of Knowledge. Like I said before, podcasts are a great way for a person to gain knowledge on a certain topic, and that's also my vision with this very podcast itself. Except instead of focusing on a specific sector for this podcast, I actually plan on covering topics from all ranges of areas that are possible, from science to technology to business to finance to politics. This podcast is the one place stop for it all. Every week, episodes will be released relating to any sort of area, about any sort of topic, and basically my vision with this podcast and my hope is that the listeners of this very podcast will be able to take the knowledge they gain from each episode and be able to use that as just a little seed and eventually take the knowledge they've gained and grow it into a huge plant that they have nurtured and enriched themselves. My hope is that my podcast is just the stepping stone of where a person can really educate themselves on a specific topic, but they take that little seed that they've gained from this podcast and grow it into something bigger, whether that means involving themselves relating to the topic a little bit more, researching about it more at home, any sort of those matters. My hope is that a person is able to take that little seed and grow it into a larger plant. And that's my basic vision. I believe that knowledge is so fundamental into helping people solve problems, into helping them stay up to date with the current trends. And that is why my whole vision with this podcast revolves around not just focusing on a specific area, but instead having podcasts or episodes on a whole range of topics. That way I can provide my audience with what each person wants, and it's not just tailored to one specific audience. I'm super excited about this opportunity to record a podcast. Like I said, I am a super avid listener of theirs, but also this is a learning journey for me because I've never done something entrepreneurial like this. I've never taken on a sole project, and so this is also going to be a whole learning journey for me of where I learn what it's like to run a project by yourself and throughout this podcast and its journey, I'll obviously be able to update you guys on what I've learned, any tips and tricks that I have for anyone who wants to start their own podcast, and obviously the knowledge that I've gained from creating this podcast itself. So yeah, I'm super excited about this journey, what it has to bring. I'm super excited to grow this podcast from just a little seed to maybe a bigger plant and become a part of it as itself, and to be able to help people around and nourish them with knowledge, because like I said, I think that's super important. All in all, I'm super excited for the journey. I hope you guys are too. Thank you for tuning into our first episode. This is just the start. I can't wait to see where this goes. You can find this podcast on all of the services where you get your podcast. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Little Seeds of Knowledge Podcast to stay up to date and to be able to network and connect with us. I'm super excited to see where this goes, and stay tuned for our first episode. Thanks for listening. Bye.